The Autobots and Decepticons then proceeded to be violently enslaved by the Quintessons and they were never heard from again. The end. Okay, but seriously, can you imagine if that's how it actually ended? Hey guys, the Fire Brothers here. It's just me. My brother couldn't be here today because... plot twist, I have no brother. You know, that's actually a very simple, joke. I'm surprised I haven't done that earlier. But anyways, these are the jokes, and let's talk about today's topic. What happened to all the characters from War for Cybertron and Follow Cybertron after the event of the game? Because we actually do know quite a bit of what happened post FOC. A lot of people have tons of questions out there about what happens after the game, how their game will have turned out and that kind of stuff. But surprisingly little is on the internet about it. So for this video, I thought I might as well give you the thing that most people crave for: knowledge on what happened after the Arc and Nemesis made it through the portal. Some rules for this video. Firstly, I will be going over characters from the game, so War for Cybertron and Follow Cybertron, so if they appear in the game, whether they were playable or non-playable, they will get a mention. And also, the stories of some of these guys stretches for so long, through several novels, series, movies, and other media, that if I summarize every character in depth, we're gonna be here forever. So I'll summarize some of them and I'll go more in depth on some of the other ones. So yeah, but anyways, now that you know the rules, let's begin with the one, the only Optimus Prime. So first off, I am pretty sure that canonically Optimus Prime wins the fight against Megatron in the final battle of FOC. After the Arc and the Nemesis cross to the space bridge, the Autobots find themselves near Velocitron, with the Nemesis not too far behind them. With the help of the star map projected by the Matrix, the Autobots find Velocitron, where they find a couple of new allies, and essentially spend the rest of the novels going from planet to planet, looking for new allies, Energon, all in search of the Allspark. During their journeys and the chase through space, the Autobots and Decepticons came into conflict against the Quintessons, which kind of forced them to team up since the Quintessons were too much for both factions to deal with by themselves, which resulted on Optimus Prime and Megatron teaming up to take on the dreaded Quintesson Curator and the rest of his troopers. At some point, the Arc would be destroyed, and Optimus Prime alongside a few other Autobots will land on Earth, where they will engage against several battles against the Decepticons while trying to protect the planet. Eventually, the events of Transformers Prime play out pretty much like we know them. At some point, Cybertron gets restored, gets threatened by Unicron, the Autobots eventually find the Allspark and use the container to seal Unicron away, and then Optimus Prime merges with the Allspark and sacrifices himself in order to bring back life to Cybertron. Until a few years later, in a certain series that brings back Optimus Prime to fight against the Fallen, lead a small rebellion against the Autobot High Council, which had been infiltrated by Decepticons, succeeded, brought peace back to Cybertron, and by the latest point in the aligned timeline, Optimus Prime became something of a spokesperson, giving former Decepticons a chance to redeem themselves and reintegrate into Cybertronian culture, be it old vehicle warriors, young and upcoming Decepticons like Wedge, or even old hated enemies. Wow. You know, times like this, it makes you realize how much some of these characters went through. Either they spent millions of years bored exploring space, left behind on Cybertron to start, or just literally stabbed in the chest. You know what they could have used? Yep, you guessed it right, folks. This video's sponsor, and full disclosure, today's video is sponsored by our paid partner, BetterHelp. As our world naturally becomes more and more complicated to live in, chances are that some of us struggle with all sorts of issues. I personally have felt a bit overwhelmed by work, keeping up with YouTube, and making time for friends and family. It can all be a bit overwhelming at times. Me personally, I've been feeling like I have been getting left behind and I haven't reached that ideal point in life just yet. I try to improve myself and do my best, but sometimes it feels like an impossible task. With no one to talk to, these insecurities can sometimes hold me back from truly progressing. This is where BetterHelp comes in. It can help you by providing online therapy service with qualified personnel. Having someone that's there to listen to you and help you work through these issues can help you make progress and break down these big feelings of insecurities into something understandable and fixable. Therapists will work around your schedule and construct a personalized timeline of progress that will help you work through these problematic feelings of insecurity. Trust me, I know all about how stressful and complicated these insecurities can be. Help me! So, start fresh any day of the year with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/thefirebrothers and get 10% off your first month of therapy. Thank you once again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. And now, back to the list. Megatron's story is very similar to Optimus, in which after the Nemesis and the Ark crossed the space bridge, Megatron was retrieved by the crew of the Nemesis and eventually engaged in a chase through space looking for the Autobot Ark, hoping that acquiring the Matrix will help him eventually find the Allspark. Much like what I said for Optimus, he got into a fight with the Quintessons, was forced to team up with Prime, eventually makes it to Earth. The events of Transformers Prime happened pretty much the same. Megatron quote-unquote dies at the end of the series, gets resurrected by Unicron, and when Unicron's spark gets sealed away and leaves Megatron's body behind, having now reacquired his freedom, Megatron had now tasted oppression and no longer wished to inflict it upon anyone else, so he declared the Decepticon movement officially over and flew away from Cybertron to parts unknown. Exactly what happened to Megatron after the events of the show we don't exactly know, but many Decepticons in the future still held on to the hope that Megatron will someday return to lead the Decepticon Empire once again. What little we know about him and what gets implied in the series and extra material seems that Megatron is off living somewhere in the cosmos as a hermit. Whether his taste of conquest has been fully sated or not, we still don't know. After being critically injured by Megatron, Bumblebee was eventually repaired and went back to active duty, helping the Autobots with their planet-hopping escapades after crossing the space bridge. He eventually joined Optimus Prime and a small cell of Autobots on Earth, where he helped fight the Decepticons there, even assisted other Autobot cells from time to time in their operations. After the events of the series and Optimus Prime's sacrifice, Bumblebee helped rebuild Cybertron and was eventually given the job of a street cop, arresting anyone that will break the law. His adventures eventually led him back to Earth, where he reunited with Optimus Prime and eventually was made privy to the treachery of the High Council that sought to take full control of Autobot society. After the events of the series, he stayed behind to still chase after Steeljack and the remaining Decepticons that were still roaming the Earth. He eventually succeeded and went back to Cybertron to mentor the next generation, now having become an Autobot of great renown. Okay, so Starscream is a really interesting one, because last time we saw Starscream, he had betrayed Megatron and kinda helped free Grimlock by accident, and him and the Decepticons were not in good terms. The novels, and look, I know some of the timeline doesn't match and some things here don't fit quite well, but in the online novels, the Starscream was already aboard the Nemesis by the time of the final battle, which it's kind of weird and it's kind of funny to think about. Like, I guess it's that Starscream literally just went back to Megatron and literally just begged him to come back into the fold.
Megatron! Megatron! We attack the rocket base at sunrise.
Starscream's journeys will eventually lead him to Earth, where he will later be reunited with Megatron and help him once again in his cause to take down the Autobots, through many betrayals, redemptions, and betrayals, and redemptions again. The last we saw of Starscream in Transformers Prime, he was at the mercy of the Predacons, who were literally about to beat the living shit out of him, only for robots in disguise to retcon this into Starscream managing to survive the Predacon encounter by strategically luring them, sheer dumb luck, stumbling upon a weapon cache with enough power to repel Skynex and Darksteel. If you guys want to know what really happened to Predacon and all that jazz, check out this video. He will later go on to reformat himself into his old War for Cybertron style body, where he freed a set of minicons that had the power to grant someone a prime level power up. His hunt for these minicons eventually led him to Earth, where he found the Dark Star Saber, got once again into conflict with Optimus Prime and the Autobots before being ultimately taken down and then taken back to Cybertron to finally be prosecuted for all his crimes, where he currently is happily rotting in a cell. Ratchet's story is very similar to Optimus and Bumblebee. Again, he was part of the Ark, they managed to survive, they escaped the Decepticons, eventually the Ark got destroyed, they rendezvous on Earth. Ratchet participated in the events of Transformers Prime, survived all the way to Predacons Rising. By the time of Robots in Disguise and the High Council's secret takeover, Ratchet was one of the many Autobots blacklisted by the High Council for being a supporter of Optimus Prime, and he was assigned a job hunting down any remaining war criminals, alongside his new minicon partner Undertow. He would eventually encounter Bumblebee and the resurrected Optimus Prime on Earth and be part of the little rebellion to take down the treacherous High Council. At one point, supposedly because of his age or maybe he just got sick of it, Ratchet decided to leave the whole hunting down Decepticon shtick, instead decided to become a new teacher at the Rescue Bot Training Academy, where his nephew, yes, Ratchet has a nephew, Medics, attended. And this is where Ratchet's story ends, with him mentoring the next generation of Autobots. Next up we got Thundercracker, and now this is a very interesting interesting one because this is where we get our first deviation from the standard Autobot and Decepticon. So Thundercracker actually participated in the final battle despite him not actually appearing there. He helped Megatron chase the Arc through space. However, at one point he was captured by the Quintesson, and despite being found innocent of crimes against the Quintesson Imperium, Thundercracker was fed to Piranhacons in the City of Hydreigon's Hall of Justice. And since we're on the topic of Thundercracker, Skywarp met a very similar fate. During the conflict against the Quintessons, he was basically crunched up by Commander Gnaw. Yes, he was killed by Gnaw! Gnaw of all people! But this is not where the story ends. The Quintessons then found the remains on Skywarp and brainwashed them. And keep in mind that he was almost dead by this point. This was not even necessary. They brainwashed him and kept him alive long enough so he could provide false testimony at the Cybertronians' trial, condemning his own people before being swallowed up for good by Gnaw as part of his midnight snap. Yikes. Now, Ironhide is another interesting case because we don't exactly know what happened to him. We do know that he was part of the final battle and he participated in several skirmishes against the Decepticons while the Autobots, went from planet to planet. And by the time of Robots in Disguise, he's blacklisted by the High Council. The defunct game, Transformers Universe, was gonna go more in depth as to what happened to Ironhide during the time gap between Transformers Prime and the Exile novel, where we see that he was part of the crew of the Arclight before eventually having his ship shot down and the survivors be hunted down by Decepticons on Earth. If he survived or not, we still don't know. But considering that the game is kinda not canon anymore, whether we can say if this is canon or not, it's kind of up in the air. Cliffjumper is someone that we know quite well. He was part of the crew of the Ark before eventually splitting off and being captured by Starscream, where he will rendezvous with Arcee and by sheer dome log will find a space bridge that they will later use to meet up with Optimus and the rest of the Autobots back on Earth, where he will unfortunately end up dying, be resurrected as a zombie, be killed again, and by virtue of having his spark reignited again by Unicron's energy, Cliffjumper will essentially be condemned to hell to fight off hordes of Terracons for all eternity, essentially becoming the Cliff Slayer. So Soundwave was also part of the final battle. After the final battle, he managed to rendezvous with the Nemesis and the rest of the Decepticons, and they chased the Ark through space. He's one of the very few Decepticons that stay with the Nemesis all the way through. And once Megatron left and the Nemesis was left under the control of Starscream, he stayed behind with the latter, mostly to keep an eye on him, and will take part in several events throughout the Transformers Prime series, until the episode Deadlock, when the Autobots started their final raid against the Decepticons, and the humans then managed to exploit his ground bridge teleportation trick by having Raph open up a second ground bridge, which their combined energies managed to create a ripple in space and time that trapped Soundwave in the Shadow Zone. Until eventually, by the time of Robots in Disguise, Soundwave managed to break free, got into a skirmish with some of his team, then got knocked back into the Shadow Zone, managed to break free thanks to the High Council, and tried to hatch a plot to nuke an entire city to get Megatron Senpai's attention to come back to him.
Notice me! No!
Before being escorted by Optimus Prime himself back to Cybertron so he could stand trial at long last. Breakdown is another interesting one because we don't know if he was part of the final battle of all of Cybertron. All we know is that him and Knockout eventually make it to Earth somehow. It never really gets explained. They fight against the Autobots. Breakdown develops across from Arachnid. Arachnid ends up killing him. His corpse gets later used by Silas to move around. He then gets turned into a Terracon before eventually being killed off for good by Arachnid once again. Yikes! Why do they hate Breakdown so much? He didn't really do anything wrong, I think. Next up we got Sideswipe, and I need to make a little clarification. This Sideswipe and that Sideswipe are two different Sideswipes. But anyways, so what we do know about Sideswipe is that he was the pilot of the Ark. So while all the fighting was going on, Sideswipe was the one that was piloting the Ark. So he joined the other Autobots as they basically searched through the stars for the Allspark and different sources of energon. Got into a fight with the Decepticons later the Quintessons, and this is pretty much where Sideswipe's story ends. We never really find out what happens to him, but after the Ark gets supposedly destroyed, he's never seen again. Maybe he went down with the ship, but honestly it's very unlikely that we'll ever find out what happened to this Sideswipe, especially when we have the Robots in Disguise one, which Hasbro seems to be focusing on. So for all intents and purposes, I think this Sideswipe is likely dead. So next up we got Brawl. So Brawl, alongside the other Combaticons, took part in the final battle where they all merged into Bruticus and, created some mayhem for the Autobots. During the fight, Bruticus was shot down by Jetfire in the Aerialbots, and supposedly this knocked him back all the way to Cybertron Cybertron, or at least far enough from the space bridge, to the point that the Combaticons never managed to cross it. Him and the other Combaticons stayed behind on Cybertron to help Shockwave maintain control of Cybertron, which all went downhill fairly fast. It is possible that Brawl then left Cybertron and went to Earth, because in Transformers universe, Brawl was gonna be one of those Decepticons that made it all the way to Earth. Supposedly just to get killed, because after his appearance in TF universe, he scans in the Earth vehicle mode and is never seen again, so it is very likely that he died on Earth. Maybe. So Jetfire is another interesting one that is sadly underdeveloped. He was one of the few Autobots that got left behind on Cybertron. He helped Ultra Magnus and the other Autobots left stranded on Cybertron fight back against Shockwave and his totalitarian regime. At one point, while Optimus and Megatron were off Cybertron, the Quintessons launched an invasion of the planet. The Quintessons managed to be repelled through some shenanigans that are honestly way too long and complicated for me to explain, but Jetfire did manage to survive the battle, although what happened to him after these events we don't know. However, by the point of Robots in Disguise, he's one of the many Autobots that got blacklisted by the High Council. Still, his fate remains unknown. So Barricade is another interesting one because he actually wasn't part of the final battle of Follow Cybertron. He's one of the many Decepticons that got left behind on Cybertron, and he mostly took the role of a street cop, maintaining the peace and arresting any disobedient Decepticons or Autobot criminals that were found in the streets. He even formed a partnership with Frenzy, yeah, much like in the movies, where the two basically had a good cop, bad cop thing kinda going. We don't exactly know what happened to him, but in Transformers The Ultimate Pop-Up universe and in Transformers universe, it's alluded that Barricade eventually does make it to Earth. He fights off the Autobots there once again, and supposedly gets killed, most likely by Bumblebee, to be honest. So Silverbolt, and you know, I'll just throw Air right here because these two are pretty much the same. Silverbolt partook in the final battle, and although we don't see them, the novels do imply that the rest of the Aerialbots are a thing by this point, and they can all combine into Superion, something that Silverbolt and the rest of the Aerialbots did quite frequently to get the Autobots an edge in combat. He helped the Autobots fight off against the Decepticons and the Quintessons. However, he's never seen again post the events of the novels, and his fate remains unknown. Okay, next up we got Slipstream, and this is actually kind of a weird one because I never knew about this. So apparently Slipstream was also part of the crew of the Nemesis. She was eventually captured by the Quintessons during the many skirmishes against them, but was eventually set free by her comrades. She somehow managed to survive all the way to the events of Robots in Disguise, where we actually find out that she has become something of a crime boss back on Cybertron, where her name is spoken with a lot of reverence and even feared by a lot of other Decepticons. Oh boy, now we have Shockwave. Okay, so Shockwave was left behind on Cybertron, badly beaten by Gremlock. He eventually repaired himself into a much tougher, larger body, became the ruler of Cybertron for a short while, and as resources became more scarce, he formed his own little zealot religious group called the Forge and started creating Predacons to ensure his rule on Cybertron, eventually getting into a little skirmish with Cliffjumper and Arcee, being left for dead by an opportunistic Starscream once he returned back to Cybertron, and as resources became more and more scarce, he went deeper underground, creating a new breed of beast machine super soldiers, before eventually picking up on the energy signature of the Omega Log, finding Megatron's crew once again, be teleporting back to Earth to rendezvous with his leader, partaking in the events of Transformers Prime, until Megatron's defeat, in which case him and Starscream went on the run to avoid being persecuted by the Autobots, where he once again couldn't help but tinker with life, creating more Predacon warriors, nearly getting himself killed by a bunch of Unicron resurrected undead Predacons, and he will later approach Predaking and the other two Predacons as they fought each other, suggesting that it might be wiser for them to use their strength to fight off Unicron and save their species, which they did with mixed results. Once Unicron was defeated and Megatron was restored, he ended the Decepticon movement and left. When the Autobots went back to look for Shockwave, he was never found. By the point of Robots in Disguise, he's still rumored to be out there, likely hiding in one of his secret labs, trying to avoid capture by the Autobots. And out of all the Decepticons in existence, his crimes are probably second to Megatron, essentially placing him in the Autobots' most wanted list. So Warpath is another weird one because we don't know if he was part of the crew of the Ark or if he stayed behind on Cybertron to help the resistance against the Decepticons. However, Transformers universe does seem to imply that Warpath was gonna make it to Earth since concept art for him exists, so his ultimate fate remains unknown. Demolisher was a DLC character for Transformers War for Cybertron, and although his parts can also be found in Follow Cybertron, we never really get a clear answer as to what happened to him. His ultimate fate remains unknown. Arcee was one of the many Autobots that actually wasn't part of the crew of the Ark. She stayed behind on Cybertron until she was eventually captured by Starscream, met Cliffjumper, through some shenanigans, found a space bridge that was built by Shockwave to make it to her so she could rendezvous with Optimus Prime and the Autobots, partook in the events of the series, teamed up with Jack, and played a crucial role in the Autobots' ultimate victory over the Decepticons, in Beast Hunters, and even Predacons Rising. After Optimus Prime sacrificed the Well of Allsparks, with Ultra Magnus being temporarily out of commission, she became the de facto leader of the Autobots for the time being, where she managed to encounter several Autobot survivors that were hiding deep within Cybertron's core, and even Grimlock and the rest of the Dinobots. Together they fought off the remains of the Four and started rebuilding Cybertron. By the point the robot was in disguise, she was blacklisted by the High Council and she fell under the command of Ultra Magnus, who had grown suspicious about where the High Council's true loyalties lied. She and her squad eventually met up with Bumblebee and the rest of his team, where they kept close communications with them as they worked together to take down the High Council, which they eventually did. So much like Brawl, Onslaught was also left behind on Cybertron after being knocked out of the Ark, while him and the rest of the Combaticons were merged into Verticus. He supposedly engaged in several operations against the Autobot resistance on Cybertron, and at some point he was gonna make an appearance in Transformers universe until unfortunately the game was canned. So we don't know what his ultimate fate is, but supposedly he would have probably died on Earth, since no records of what happened to him after the Ark exists. So Jazz partook in the final battle of Hollow Cybertron and eventually helped the Autobots during their several skirmishes against the Decepticons and the Quintessons during the Aligned novels. He will survive all the way to the point the robots in disguise and eventually make it back to Cybertron, where he will surprisingly enough find employment with the High Council, which sent him on several missions from time to time. Eventually he will discover the truth of the High Council, and once he was reunited with Optimus Prime, he decided to join his effort in overthrowing the corrupt council. After the council was defeated, Optimus nominated Jazz and the rest of the crew to be part of a provisional council until proper elections could be held. I find it kind of funny that Jazz plays such a big role in FOC and honestly the beginning portions of the universe only to disappear for a huge chunk of it and just reappear in the end. That's like the ultimate Sigma male move. So Devin is another interesting case because he's a DLC character, but at one point, and I think this is before the events of Hollow Cybertron, Deadon was critically injured and sent to Skyquake Pre-Memorial Hospital, where Shockwave will later request for him to be a test subject for a laser core procedure that will see his spark transplanted into a new shell-formed clone from the Wrecker Wheeljack, which he was then infused by Dark Energon, which kind of deformed him and made him kind of insane. But his ultimate fate after these events remains unknown. Scattershot is another DLC character that was from Warpath Cybertron, and unfortunately we don't have anything about him. The closest thing that we know about the guy was that he was gonna appear in Transformers universe, so he did make it all the way to Earth. And his story was gonna be developed there before the game was unfortunately shut down. Which is kind of a shame, because his universe design is like straight up sex. Okay, so Omega Supreme is an interesting one. At the end of Warpath Cybertron, he was corrupted by Dark Energon, and in Photo Cybertron it is said that he had to be put into stasis due to the Dark Energon corruption. However, during the events of the Aligned novels, the Quintessons launched a huge invasion against Cybertron, and Omega Supreme was reawakened once again to protect the planet. He was one of the first Cybertronians to stand against Tyrannicon's Sharkticon flotilla, and although the Autobot Guardian brought his considerable firepower to bear, destroying several Sharkticon ships in the process, he ultimately could not stand against the general of the invasion himself, who clambered up Omega Supreme and speared him through the head, taking him out of the fight. Now, it's never said if he died from this or not, but he's never seen again. And although he was blacklisted by the High Council and you could like infer that to him still being alive, may I remind you that Cliffjumper also got blacklisted by the High Council, and he was, well, in hell. So, yeah, he's probably dead. Oh boy, Trypticon is another interesting one. So he partook in the final battle because, well, he was the Nemesis, he chased the Ark through space. At some point, Starscream was left in charge of the Nemesis until Megatron came back. He's like, look at me, Starscream, I'm the captain now. Then the events of the series take place, where he's basically just the base for the Decepticons. At one point, he briefly comes back online, he regains his sentience thanks to Dark Energon, before eventually losing it. And by the end of the series, the Autobots basically take command of him. him and use him in the Predacon's Rising movie in an attempt to fight back against Unicron and his horde of undead Predacons. However, the warship didn't last long and Trypticon/Nemesis crash landed near the Well of Allsparks. By the point of Robots in Disguise, apparently the Nemesis has been reformatted for a third time into some kind of prison. Yes, so the Autobots took Trypticon and turned him into a building that is now used to house several Decepticon criminals. Now look, I know that sounds bad, but to be fair, I don't think the Autobots knew that Trypticon was ever the Nemesis. It was never made clear, and they never once referred to the Nemesis as Trypticon. The only ones who will know about that will be the Decepticons, and maybe Knockout and a few other characters that were there to see it. But yeah, at one point you just have to feel bad for the guy. Next up we got Rumble, and while he was part of the final fight against the Ark and fellow Cybertron, he stayed with Soundwave for the most part, and we do know he does make it to Earth. Though at some point he was probably killed off, or probably just sending faraway missions away from the main action of the series, cause he's never seen again. And honestly, the same thing can be said for Frenzy. Well, Frenzy was kinda left behind on Cybertron with Barricade, and the two of them became partners as they arrest the renegade Decepticons and Autobot war criminals, until the latter eventually makes it to Earth, where he rendezvous with Soundwave and his ultimate fate remains unknown. However, the most interesting out of all the cassettes is definitely Laserbeak, who survives the events of Follow Cybertron, joins Soundwave and the other Decepticons owner, partakes in the events of the series, fights against the Decepticons several times, gets stuck in the Shadow Zone, comes back for Robots in Disguise, gets defeated by Optimus, and gets taken back to Cybertron to stand trial. However, this is where something very interesting happens. In the Rescue Bots Academy cartoon, Laserbeak was on board of a damaged ship, stranded in space, until he gets rescued by, well, the Rescue Bots. After being rescued by the Rescue Bots, Wedge, who himself was a former Decepticon that was given the role by Optimus, invited Laserbeak to join them aboard Citadel Secundus for the recruit's year's second graduation party, but Laserbeak declined, believing himself unworthy due to his past misdeeds. However, Laserbeak would change his mind later on and gave a hand to the Rescue Bots on some occasions, something that eventually got the attention of Optimus Prime, who even praised Laserbeak and the others who assisted in the rescue, and offered them the opportunity to become part of the next class at the Academy. Laserbeak was hesitant at first due to his allegiances, but Optimus recognized his efforts to change and officially made him an Autobot, at which point he accepted. Which, in all honesty, it's kinda sweet in a way, not the outcome I expected for Laserbeak. Although I'll be honest, now I feel really bad for Soundwave because he has no cassettes left to accompany him. Next up we got Perceptor. Perceptor was part of the crew of the Ark, and while we don't see him in the final battle, he actually was there. In the Allied novels, he accompanies the Autobots through their journey through space, and while we don't exactly know what happened between the novels and the Prime cartoon, by the point of Rescue Bots Academy, he reintegrates himself in Cybertron society and becomes a teacher at the Rescue Bots Academy, trying to help the next generation, and becoming a mentor for the students at the Academy. You know what, I'm just glad he got a happy ending. Wheeljack was a DLC character for Follow Cybertron, and we don't exactly know if he was part of the crew of the Ark or just stayed behind on Cybertron, but at some point he leaves Cybertron to try and find the other records that are scattered throughout the universe. He finds some, only to lose them, until eventually he makes his way to Earth where he finds Bulkhead, and will later join Optimus Prime and the other Autobots in their quest to fight against the Decepticons and restore Cybertron, which they eventually do by the point of Predacon's Rising. Now, unfortunately, despite being one of my favorite characters, I found absolutely nothing that tells us what happened to Wheeljack post Transformers Prime, but I like to believe that he's still out there, probably wrecking stuff. Next up we got Hound. Now, Hound is a DLC character, and we actually do know for a fact that he did not partake place in the final battle. According to Sideswipe, he says that he was quote-unquote lost back on Cybertron. So we know he was still alive to some degree, and by the time of Robots in Disguise, he was blacklisted by the High Council. But then again, like we established with Cliffjumpers, this doesn't really mean much. He was gonna make an appearance in Transformers Universe before the game was, shut down. So it is very likely that he was part of Ultra Magnus's crew that, kinda led left Cybertron and probably made it to Earth before the events of Transformers Prime, only to be killed off. I don't know, I'm just spitballing ideas here. Next up we got Ultra Magnus, and oh boy, there's actually quite a bit to say about this one, but I'm gonna keep it simple. So he was not part of the crew of the Ark and the Nemesis. He actually stayed behind on Cybertron to fight back against Shockwave and his regime, until the Quintessons showed up and kinda ruined everything. After the failed Quintesson invasion, Ultra Magnus rallied what remained of the Autobot military and led a big mission to score several Autobot civilian ships off Cybertron. The Decepticons were sent to stop them, but with the help of the Dinobots, Ultra Magnus managed to fight them off. He was eventually captured by Shockwave and the Forge, until being rescued by Grimlock and Cole. After a successful prison break, the first Predacon kill ever, and a false running with Shockwave, Ultra Magnus left Cybertron on a small ship to try and find their brothers and sisters that were scattered across the stars, which he did find some of them only to eventually lose them, until eventually he managed to track down a signal all the way to Earth where he rendezvoused with Optimus Prime and his crew to fight off against the Decepticons once again, which the events of Transformers Prime and Beast Hunters kinda play out just like we know them. Where Magnus loses an arm, gets a sweet hook arm, they restore Cybertron, bring peace back to it, and the Predacons show up, get severely damaged, Optimus Prime sacrifices himself and restores life to Cybertron, and by the point of robots in disguise, Ultra Magnus leads a rebellious faction against the High Council, which he suspects they have been infiltrated by Decepticon spies. With Optimus Prime gone, he becomes the de facto leader of Team Prime, which consists of him, Arcee, and Bulkhead. He kept close tabs on Bumblebee and Optimus on Earth and eventually helped them take down the High Council, restoring peace and liberty back to Cybertron. So Grimlock is an interesting one. After the tower collapses, Grimlock kinda, well, dies, but he gets found by the rest of the Dinobots and he gets fully repaired, although it's a bit of a long and painful progress. He teams up with Ultra Magnus to help the remaining Autobots flee Cybertron, and after Ultra Magnus departs, Grimlock becomes the de facto leader of a small cell of Autobots on Cybertron who look up to him as if he was a pride himself. Though there's still several other Autobot factions out there that do not like the Dinobots and see them as freaks, despite all the good they do. While stuck on Cybertron, him and the rest of the Dinobots will be in charge of protecting the Autobots, fighting off against the Forge, and several Predacons that Shockwave will slowly create, in his quest to create the perfect beast machine super soldier, which will end up being Predacon. Several years will happen where the Dinobots were basically the de facto leaders of the Autobots on Cybertron, until the events of Transformers Prime happen, and the Autobots manage to restore the planet and make it habitable again, which unfortunately will have the consequence of flooding the depths of Cybertron with energon, killing a few Autobots and Decepticons and forcing them to go back to the surface. The Dinobots will then rendezvous with Team Prime once again, and engage in a final battle against the Predacons and the Forge. By this point in the timeline, Grimlock and the other Dinobots were very jaded, and above all else, pretty tired of the killing. Once the rebuilding effort began, the Dinobots considered just leaving the Autobots, since because of their bestial forms, they were kinda considered as freaks, and they thought they would not fit in with the new Cybertronian society. But Arcee convinced them to stay, telling them that they were true Autobots and that they were more than welcome amongst them. Grimlock and the other Dinobots accepted this offer, but instead of remaining with the Autobots, they decided that they had enough of killing and they wanted to build stuff. So they made up plans to build a new city they will name New Spark, in honor of their underground home where they once ruled. By the point of robots in disguise, the Dinobots were known as legendary warriors. Several Autobots and even new upcoming Dinobots will name themselves after Grimlock and crew, hoping to live up to their glory, using their names as a badge of honor. The Dinobots themselves managed to successfully integrate themselves back into Cybertronian society, with some of them even becoming teachers for the next generation, and guiding them to a better tomorrow. Alright, next time we got Swindle, and I'll just play the clip.
Swindle, my armada.
We have fallen slightly behind schedule due to the expansion of operations locally. Speak up, Swindle. We're having trouble hearing you.
And the same thing applies to Vortex, who also just kinda got left behind and his story was never developed. However, someone whose story did get concluded was Blastoff, who, under the orders of Shockwave, tried to prevent Ultra Magnus and the rest of the Autobots from leaving Cybertron. He led the charge against them, but unfortunately during the battle, he ended up with Grimlock's sword through his chest, basically killing him, unless this is like a Spinister scenario where he just magically manages to survive that. But I don't think so, because he's never seen again after this, so Blastoff actually does die here. Dragster was a DLC character for Fall of Cybertron, and while he didn't have much story relevance and we don't know if he even partook part of the final battle in the arc, we do know that he managed to survive long enough to rendezvous with Mother Master and the rest of the Stunticons, where he partook in several skirmishes during the 2015 Robots in Disguise cartoon, until eventually him and the rest of the Stunticons were defeated by Bumblebee's team and taken aboard Prime Force 1 back to Cybertron to stand trial. Quick as a DLC character, and honestly this is one that we don't exactly know what happened to him. All that we know about him, like story-wise, is that he participates in an attack on an Autobot complex in the waning days of the war on Cybertron. Supposedly this is before the launch of the arc, and the fact that he's never seen again after this kinda leads me to believe that he probably dies in the escalation map. So this might be one of the few cases where a character canonically dies through escalation. Maybe. Okay, so next up we got the Insecticons. Now Sharpshot, he's never heard from again after Follow Cybertron, after Grimlock bit him and stomped on him. So he probably actually died from that, surprisingly enough. Hitman Kyber does survive the events of Follow Cybertron, and he will go on to hunt several Autobots as they went deeper underground Cybertron looking for Energon, feeding off their Energon alongside other Insecticons. He will eventually be found by Sludge and Snar, where they kill his Insecticon escort and basically beat him to death, since Snar knew that if they let him go he would probably commit more atrocities, which honestly, I never really liked Insecticons, so I don't really care. Good job, Snarl. And next up we got Harsho. This is probably the most famous one out of all the Insecticons, just because we actually know what happened to him. He survived Follow Cybertron, eventually he made it all the way to Earth, where he apparently killed several wreckers during the in-between FOC in the Prime cartoon. He almost killed Bulkhead, which incited the wrath of Miko and Wheeljack, who went on a vengeance mission against him. And while Wheeljack will end up losing the fight, Miko will take the chance to kill him using Wheeljack's ship, ending the Insecticon story for good. And last but not least, we got Metroplex. Now, after Metroplex sacrifices himself to fuel the arc, he's not exactly dead, he's basically in stasis because of a lack of Energon. However, never once it is said if they ever revived him. I did make a video about it, talking about the possibility of him being brought back. And by the time of Robots in Disguise, he was apparently featured on a card in the Heroes of Cybertron trading card series, which Wedge owned. He does have a slightly different look, so it is kind of implied that he was probably eventually revived, or at the very least remembered fondly by the Autobots as a hero. But it's hard to say in all honesty. However, I personally like to believe that he's still around, and I really like Metroplex, so, you know, maybe being a bit biased, but I do think he's alive at the point of 2015, because he never really suffered any critical injury that I don't think, you know, him repowering his spark would be like an impossible task, but that's just me. But yeah guys, those are all the characters from War for Cybertron, Follow Cybertron, and what happened to them. Honestly, I had to do quite a bit of research for this one because some of these were so obscure. Like, I did not know about Slipstream, much less the whole Trypticon being turned into a building, which is kind of but you know, it's Transformers, like messed up like this happens all the time. But yeah guys, that's basically what happened to your favorite characters after the game ended. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on all this. Are you happy with the way some of these plotlines were resolved? Are you unsatisfied that we never got an answer to some of these characters like Sideswipe? And in your opinion, what would you have done with some of these characters? Like, I know the line continuity is pretty messy, so not everyone gets the same level of relevance from, you know, product to product, but it's still at least kind of nice that we at least get some resolution for some of these. Now, emphasis on some of these, because a lot of them are like just missing, or they were going to be in Transformers Universe until that got scrapped. So yeah, if you guys want me to do more like what happened to type of videos, I could even do one of these for the movies, because there's several characters out there that, you know, whose fates never get explained. So I think it could be fun if I make, you know, one of those types of videos, because it's been a while since I've done one of them, but only if you guys want me to. But yeah guys, that's it for this video. Hopefully you all enjoy. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Do that annoying YouTuber stuff that the algorithm likes so much. And I will see you guys in the next video. Stay safe, guys. Anyways guys, before we go, shout out to our super cool sex tier patrons. Omar Amin, Crawley666, Primeburst616, Steve Martin, Moriarty, Zifferman, Knights Trans Official, King Spartan, Crazy T-Rex, Super Saiyan Transformer Hedgehog, Winslow Lopes Hightower, Xavier the God, Stitch Productions, and Scrub Lordo. And also shout out to the channel Members Club, which currently consists of Feedlift 1987, Hamad Ahmed, and Sean Ryder. Thank you guys for your support. If you become a channel member, you get access to some really cool new emojis, and get an icon right next to your name. But if you want to support us through Patreon, you get access to some of the videos that I haven't made public just yet, along with shoutouts if you request your own video depending on the tier. Again, thank you all so much for your support. It really helps me keep the channel going, and it's much appreciated. So consider joining if you feel like it, you know, cause freedom is the right of all sentient beings, and we don't force anyone. So thank you to the channel members and patrons for your support, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye guys.